What is the difference between deliberate practice and purposeful practice as defined by Anders Ericsson? So this is actually really difficult to find. I couldn't find it online. I'm sure it's probably in his book Peak, which he has written, but unfortunately I have the audiobook version, so I can't search through the book to find the specific definitions of practice. So I've looked through his psychology papers and looked online to try and find it, and this is the best that I've come up with. So first I'm going to talk about what deliberate practice is. I'm going to talk about Anders' definition. I'm then going to break that down into something that you can actually understand. And then we're going to talk about the difference between purposeful and deliberate practice. Okay, so let's look at this definition here. Deliberate practice. Okay, what is deliberate practice? Well, deliberate practice, let's zoom in here. All right, that zoomed in too much. Deliberate practice includes activities that have been specifically designed to improve the current level of performance. Deliberate practice would allow for repeated experiences in which the individual can attend to the critical aspects of the situation and incrementally improve his or her performance in response to knowledge of results, feedback, or both from a teacher. Okay? So this is very confusing. If you're very confused, don't worry. I'm going to explain this in more simple terms. This is how smart people talk in a way that us trying to do the work can't understand what you're saying. There's too many words in here. All right, so this is it more simply. So deliberate practice is trying to do something you cannot yet do. So that's very important. It needs to be above your current skill level. It can't be something that you already know how to do. It has to be above what you can currently do. Okay, so that's important bit number one about deliberate practice, that it has to be harder than what you have to do. Generally, this is going to be a subset of the game that you play. So it's not going to be the whole thing. It's going to be one particular little thing. So if we take tennis, for example, it might be practicing a low backhand, for example. All right, so you'll just practice that swing over and over again because that's an area of weakness or you want to improve it. And so you would focus on that one particular thing. So you would then focus on improving that area through repetition and feedback. So you'd be doing a similar or the same thing over and over again, and you'd be getting feedback as to whether you're doing it correctly or not, so that you can adjust until you're doing it correctly more often than not, and then eventually till you're doing it correctly, almost 100% of the time. And the third criteria is that it is led by a teacher or by a coach, which is what makes deliberate practice. So for example, with the backhand that we're talking about with tennis, rather than just playing a game of tennis against someone where you may get that low backhand a couple of times throughout the match, it would be you would have a coach and they would either hit balls at you or you would have a machine hitting balls to that specific spot. And you would then focus on doing that low backhand and focus on the right movement, focus on hitting it to the right spot on the court that you're aiming for. And so it'd be very narrow activity where you're just focusing on that one thing. Ideally in that situation, you would also have your coach there who was, telling you whether you're doing it right, maybe your stance is wrong, maybe you're moving your head the wrong way. They can identify these little things and give you that feedback. Alternatively, if you don't have a coach there, you could have a video camera to watch technique, or you could just be focusing on whether or not you're actually getting the ball to the right spot. So for a baseball pitcher, pitching to a particular spot could be considered deliberate practice if they're trying to hit the same spot over and over again, as long as that's teacher-led. So I'm kind of getting out of... It's very confusing. Anyway, what's the difference between deliberate and purposeful practice? The difference is this teacher-led part. Okay, if you take that out, you've now gone from deliberate practice to purposeful practice. So purposeful practice is exactly the same as deliberate practice. You're still trying to do something you cannot yet do. You're still focusing on improving that area through repetition and through getting the feedback as to whether you're doing it correctly or not, so you can do it correctly more often than not and work towards getting it basically as close to perfect as humanly possible. So you're still doing all of those things. The only thing is it's student-led, not teacher-led. So if it's a drill that you've designed for yourself, If it's feedback that you're getting yourself through video camera or through the game that I play, there's color overlays as to whether I'm doing something as quickly as possible or not. So I can see that feedback there. But if it's student-led, it's purposeful practice. If you've decided on it yourself, if you set up the drill yourself, if you're getting feedback yourself, then it's purposeful practice. If a coach has told you to do that exact same drill and you only have coaching once a week, and you then go away and you do that activity exactly the same as you would have done if you chose to do it yourself, but someone told you to do it, that's deliberate practice, assuming that the teacher is someone who has experience getting people to the skill level that you want to get to. So purposeful practice and deliberate practice can actually be exactly the same. The only difference in the definitions is to whether or not a teacher or coach designed the practice or whether the student designed the practice themselves. So that's the difference. As far as I'm aware, no studies have been done as to the effectiveness of purposeful practice versus deliberate practice. So Anders obviously focused on, the importance of deliberate practice, on becoming an expert. But I don't think there's been any comparison between whether purposeful practice or deliberate practice are better and how that affects. Because I think often in situations, a student designs a drill and knows the game better than the coach or knows their weaknesses and is doing it and on the grind so much that they can discover these things, a new way to do a drill. That could be better than a teacher. So I can imagine there'd be times where purposeful practice will be better than deliberate practice. But there would also be situations where the student's doing a skill incorrectly or they're focusing on something that doesn't matter, in which case purposeful practice would be worse than deliberate practice. But there's some fields, some things where coaching doesn't exist or there's not coaches who have been proven to lead people to a high level of performance. The game that I play, Super Smash Bros. Melee, coaches hardly exist. There are 2 coaches maybe for top 5 players in the world. And then after that, there's not really coaches who have taken people to a high level. So that doesn't really exist. So I guess all of the practice that I'm doing, I don't know, it flicks in and out of purposeful versus deliberate because friends who are at a higher level than me provide me with a drill to do to improve a certain area of my skill. And I do that, that would then be considered deliberate practice because they're coaching me and teaching me on that. And they've told me to go and do that. Whereas I identify that I'm having problems with something, design a drill myself to tackle that issue, that would be purposeful practice. So as far as I'm aware, that's the difference. There's nothing saying which is better than the other because they're exactly the same. It's really just whether you're getting the appropriate feedback and whether you're focusing on the right things to improve, not the wrong things to improve. So I wouldn't deliberate too much on whether you're getting deliberate practice versus purposeful practice. They're basically identical. You just want to make sure you have that feedback in place that shows that you are correcting technique if you're doing incorrect technique. So like my daughter's doing karate, for example. If she was to go home and do purposeful practice and she is doing a punch incorrectly, then that can reinforce bad habits, which is a bad thing. So it's kind of ideal for her to go and get training from the teacher about how to do it so the teacher can give feedback right there and then. So, but that would be a situation where she's not receiving the feedback as to whether she's doing it correctly. The only way to get that feedback is to actually have a teacher. So in that case, you probably need deliberate practice. But for me, there's a certain skill I'm practicing in my game called wave dashing. If you do it frame perfectly, so as quickly as it can be done, with the training mod that I have for the game, it then flashes yellow over your character if you do it frame perfectly. If you don't do it frame perfectly, it doesn't flash yellow. So I'm getting the feedback as to whether or not I'm doing it perfectly without the help of a trainer. So I don't really need a trainer in that aspect. So don't worry about it too much. Just make sure that you're trying to do things that you can't yet do. Make sure those things that you're trying to learn are worth learning, and make sure that you're getting feedback so you're not reinforcing bad technique. That would be my advice on this type of practice. There is some deliberation and some argument as to whether deliberate practice does actually correlate with success as much as Anders predicts. Some people think it doesn't. I'm kind of banking on it, but I'll keep reading about it, keep trying to learn more. But I hope that this has been helpful to you. All right, guys, that is it from me today. You can check out all of my videos, everything that I do over at becomingbest.com. If you want to see all the purposeful practice as well as deliberate practice I'm doing, I track that all over at melee.co, so melee.co. You can see all my tracking over there. And if you want to check out that book by Anders Ericsson, which is a must read if you want to become the best, that's called Peak. Go to becomingbest.com/peak. And you can check that out. That'll redirect you over to Amazon where you can get the book or the audio book or Kindle. So becomingbest.com/peak. Check that out. And until next time, do what it takes to become the best.